Hey guys, it's Mike here, and in this video I'm going to be reviewing The Predator, which is the fourth solo Predator film in the franchise and the sixth film if we count the AVP movies, although most of us don't do that. Now, Predator is one of my favorite films of all time, as well as my second favorite Arnold Schwarzenegger film behind Terminator 2. It's one of the most macho, badass movies ever made, with a great blend of action, science fiction, and horror. However, the subsequent films have never really lived up to the same level of quality. There's some parts of Predator 2 that I enjoyed, and Predators is an enjoyable movie with a good cast, but the original Predator stands head and shoulders above the rest. So going into The Predator, my expectations weren't very high. However, the film still left me disappointed. So was The Predator a bad movie? Well, let me get into this review. Now, this movie was directed by Shane Black, who also played the character Hawkins in the original Predator. Shane Black was mostly brought into the original film as a way of the filmmakers getting him to improve their script for the movie, but without paying him for that job. But regardless, he helped on that film and had credibility going into this one. However, Black was also the director of Iron Man 3, which is perhaps my least favorite MCU movie, and a large part of that was the overly comedic direction that the movie took, which really undermined the story it was telling. So going into The Predator, I was really concerned that we would get something similar, and when it comes down to it, we pretty much did. The tone of this film is mostly comedic, with characters cracking jokes one after the next in each scene, but the story of the film doesn't really lend itself to something so comedic, and neither does many of its story beats. This is an R-rated film in what is essentially a sci-fi action horror series, so there's lots of deaths and gory sequences. The main threat is meant to be big and intimidating, but he ultimately clashes with the overall tone of the movie, where one second we're supposed to find something funny, but the next it's a serious moment involving family drama or a serious mental illness. And it really doesn't work. Not to mention that even some of the jokes don't work, with some of them being awkward or cringy, especially involving some of the characters and their traits. But let's get into the cast while we're on the subject. The main character of the movie is Quinn McKenna, who is played by Boyd Holbrook. He's an army ranger who has an encounter with a predator which results in his team being wiped out. I liked him in Narcos, but he's probably the least interesting Predator main character so far. Eventually, this leads to him meeting up with a team of soldiers with mental disorders. Among them is Keegan-Michael Key from Key and Peele, as well as Thomas Jane, who played the Punisher. Although in this movie, Jane's character has Tourette's syndrome, which causes him to shout obscenities, which are used for comedic effect. Pretty much everyone in this film is a comedic relief though, which makes it hard to relate to any of them or really care when they're in peril. This also includes the main human antagonist of the film, played by Sterling K. Brown. He's a character with extensive knowledge of the Predators, and may have even given them that name. Although as they point out several times, the term Predator wouldn't necessarily fit what these aliens are. But anyway, we're supposed to find him threatening at points, especially later on, but he's telling jokes and looks like a dope half the time, so it's pretty difficult to take him seriously. Then there's Olivia Munn's character, who is a biologist who specializes in extraterrestrial life. However, she's also a character who suddenly becomes a badass out of nowhere. There's literally zero build for or explanation of how she knows how to do half the things she does in the film, but all the while she's keeping up with trained soldiers, jumping on top of cars, and even fighting the Predators, and it's pretty ridiculous. I know the term Mary Sue seems overused these days, but that's what her character really boils down to. And finally, for the human characters, there's McKenna's son, who is a character explained to be on the autism spectrum. As a result, he's presented as super intelligent, although this is pushed a little too far when he is shown being able to use the Predator technology and decode their language at points. It reminds me a little of the movie Mercury Rising with Bruce Willis. It does tie in with the theme of people with different mental states in this film, but I wasn't really a fan of this subplot, especially when they start discussing the next step in the human evolution. But we should also talk about the Predator, who is the main draw of the film, and the normal Predator is cool while he's around. They once again use practical effects to create the Predator, showing him cutting down humans and using cool bits of advanced technology. When he's fighting the main team of soldiers is where some of the best parts of the film are. Unfortunately, the original Predator is also underused in the film, and doesn't have as much screen time as you would expect. That was where much of the disappointment I had in this film came from, since I came to see the Predator Predator be the badass he was in some of the other movies. Yet in this one, he's only badass until they need to play up the other giant predator that we see in the trailers. I was hoping he wouldn't team up with the humans like we saw in AVP and Predators, but even that would have been better than what we got. And that leads into the main antagonist of the film, and perhaps its biggest problem, the upgrade predator or super predator, whatever he's supposed to be called. He's presented as this ultimate predator who is even bigger and badder, but he has none of the same impact or intimidation factor, and I think a lot of that comes down to him being completely CGI. At least with the real Predator, it's a guy in a suit, and you can tell that he's really there, and it makes him feel more real and intimidating. But with this Mega Predator, he's just a walking mass of digital effects, and the CG isn't really that good. There's some CG in this film that actually seems unfinished, particularly during his scenes and a sequence on a baseball diamond. But ultimately, this leads to the main threat of the film seeming less threatening, and the messy tone doesn't really help matters either. Another problem I have is continuity. Now, this movie actually does have some connections to the previous movies, referencing both Predator 1 and 2. They even have Jake Busey, the son of Gary Busey, play a role in the movie, although it's basically a cameo. But there's some things that don't make sense within the context of the prior films, like how the Predator technology works, or even how the ships look. I'm sure that the connections were there to make fans feel like this isn't a straight reboot, but they probably shouldn't have stopped at only a few references. Now, this film isn't all bad. In fact, I found some aspects of it enjoyable. Seeing the Predator take people out was fun, as was Shane Black taking advantage of that R rating to put in some gore and other explicit scenes. There were some fun action sequences and some laugh out loud moments. They also used some of the classic Alan Silvestri score from the original movie. But ultimately, I didn't find myself caring about the characters, which is a problem that the Predator movies have had since the original. And the comedy in the film was pushed to such a point where, much like in Iron Man 3, it diminished the story being told. Going into this movie, I was hoping that it would be another fun addition to the Predator franchise, and maybe lead to bigger things, but I was ultimately disappointed. It's not a bad movie, but it is pretty mediocre. I'm going to give The Predator a 5 out of 10. Now, I'm not sure that I'd say this is the worst Predator movie. I think I enjoyed it more than Predator 2, which I found largely boring, and the AVP movies speak for themselves, but I'd probably put it in 4th place behind Predators. Hopefully, if they do another one, they can take it in a different direction, with no more mega predators or jokes every 5 seconds. They should see if they can get John McTiernan back too. I'm sure he'd be more than willing to make another one at this point, and just bring back Arnold already, since he's been a major missing component in every film since the first one. So what did you guys think of The Predator? Did you like it, or were you disappointed like I was? Let me know down below. Also, if you're new to this channel, then make sure to subscribe and enable notifications so that you can see all of my videos right away when they come out. And if you like this video, then make sure to stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, and you better subscribe, enable those damn notifications.